Welcome back as we continue our discussion of Sula by Toni Morrison. Go on, tell us more about Sula and Nell.
Sure. Actually, if it's okay to do another
Oh,
character,
yeah, sure. No, yeah.
Ajax.
Oh,
He
yeah.
is important because he is Sula's primary love interest. Like I say, she sleeps around very easily.
hmm
This is a guy that she actually feels some true, attraction in the long term for. But the moment that he gets the inkling that, hey, she maybe wants to settle here, he is out the door. That
Yeah.
kind of ruins the relationship for him.
Yeah.
Um,
But some of the best writing is that part of the book. Let me see if I can find where my note is on that. Dun, 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 dun. Oh, it's in the chapter of probably 1939, I think. And the Sula's attitude about sex is kind of spelled out there. And then there's between pages 127 and 137, there's about 10 good pages on Sula and Ajax and
mhm.
Sula's uh, internal dialogue, if you will, about their sexual relationship that is just amazing. I mean, oh my goodness. Yeah, he's not in it very much in the book. I mean, the entirety of the book, but he's very important character. He has impact. Yes.
He's he's a door in for us into Sula.
Mhm. Yes. Yeah, that's his primary function.
hmm
Although I will say this book has multiple instances of guys skipping out. And I
hmm
think that Morrison is most sympathetic to Ajax. We are able to understand why it is that Sula truly likes him and cares for him. We are able to see some parts of their relationship which are truly functional and very caring, and how they just enjoy talking to each other. So he is not demonized.
Right. It's
So,
disappointing when he leaves.
mhm.
And I think that's some of the other male characters who have abandoned families or children, I think, is it Nell's raised by her single mother, isn't she?
Let's see. Nell. Okay, that Nell's family. I have it written down.
Okay.
There's Cecile,
Mm-hmm.
and then there is Rochelle, who is the New Orleans Creole prostitute.
Mm-hmm.
And I am using the terminology of the day.
Right.
Helene, who is raised by her grandmother, who's strict and conventional. She's married at 16, and she lives a comfortable middle class life. And then there's Nell.
Okay. So, but both Sula and Nell have absent fathers.
Mhm.
And those are more, there's less work done by Toni Morrison to give us insight into those men as we get into, say, Ajax and Jude, Nell's husband. We get more insight into that generation of men, and I think that's a interesting point. It's not the fathers that we're focused on
Mhm.
in this book of these two women. It's the husbands or significant others, if you will. And with Sula, there were lots of others, but there was really only one that was kind of significant, and that was Ajax. So I found that to be interesting, that it wasn't your typical absent father motif. It more played out with just men, absent men,
Mhm.
in a more equitable, not equal, but equal status almost. It's like the dynamic of the male and the female is in the same, are for relationships, not like intimate relationships. It's not about parent-child relationships. Does that make
Men are
sense?
not necessity in this
Right,
world.
right, right. Yeah.
And men are, have the quote unquote lesser qualities. I mean, you've got, the Mr. Suicide Day, and then you've got the grandson who, the grandmother has to take care of because he's lost his marbles, and
Ralph.
they're just, they're like, like you said, they are unnecessary, but they're necessary to their livelihoods to bring them into wholeness.
hmm
That would be the purpose that they serve.
Yeah, and I think for Nell, because she does kind of end up with that conventional life and has children, You know, obviously her husband Jude provides that whole family, that whole as in wholeness family, not entire. I meant the wholeness aspect of it. You know, there's a father, there's a mother, there's children. And the fact that he leaves is not good, but that we're coming to that, right?
Right. And yet, you know, whenever somebody is abandoned by their man in this book, they survive.
Yeah.
I still say they're not necessary.
Yeah.
And I believe that it's Eva,
Mhm.
who is the one who runs the boarding house, the
Mhm.
grandmother of Sula.
Yeah.
When Boy leaves, there's a moment when he comes back and she's kind of like, I'm going to feel this out. I'm going to kind of dress up a little bit, you know, see how things stand. And at the end of that discussion, she's like, you know what? I'm going to just go ahead and hate him my whole life. And she holds on to that as a comfort.
Yeah.
You know, she feels like I am a more steady person because I know what to emotionally do with him for the rest of my life.
Just hate. Just
Mhm.
hate. Yeah. I actually kind of love Eva. There's something about Eva that just really speaks to me. I don't know. There's a lot of characters in this book that just really speak to me, but I kind of love the character of Eva. There's just so much going on with Eva and Hannah, her daughter, who is Sula's mother, right? Yeah, have I got
Yes.
that relationship right? Yeah. There's so many names to remember. But yeah, anyway, so anyway, back to our characters.
Yes. Excellent. Did you want to bring any other characters to light, or should
Well, we do have to mention Jude a little more because
We should,
he
yes.
is Nell's husband, and she chooses to marry Nell, and it's her marriage to, or sorry, she chooses to marry Jude, and when Nell and Jude get married, that sort of implicitly breaks that childhood bond that she and Sula had shared so strongly. It's a turning point for both of them, if you will. She has chosen a certain lifestyle, you know, by getting married, and she ends up having kids. And Sula, at shortly after Nell's wedding, that's when Sula leaves town and goes on a completely different path. And so they're separated for 10 years because of basically one of them got married. I mean, it is very clear that had Nell not married Jude, Sula might not have left town. You know, at least it was clear to me. It was kind of like one of those things that really changed both their lives. That was my impression of that moment. You know.
Well, their lives were the same up to that point, so there had to be a
They shared everything.
diverging
Yeah.
road in the woods, you
Yeah.
know, so to speak,
Yeah.
for them to become who they were to become and live out what they thought they were supposed to do. And then at the end, and they come together and basically compare notes.
Yeah, that's right.
What the rest of the universe was like.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And the book picks up after Nell gets married in 1929 chapter, I think. And the next chapter is 1937. I mean, and then the two chapters, 1937 and 1939, really cover, you know, a lot of what's going on, the meat of the more now part of the story, if you will, that really grips you and everything. But that's when we you know, Sula comes back to town. We start to see how the town sees her and her, because of her sexual looseness, as the town would call it, her many affairs, and the different things that she does that causes the town to chit chat and you know, react. But yeah, so yeah.
I
Go ahead.
feel like we should briefly mention Ralph, and actually, Deborah, you already briefly mentioned, but I feel like we should have put trigger warnings all at the beginning of this discussion. But Ralph is Eva's son,
Yes.
and so this would be Sula's uncle. He fights in World War I. He comes back traumatized. And he basically is an addict as a coping mechanism.
Yeah.
He can't readapt to life. He cannot function within the life.
Yeah, I mean, unlike Shadrach finds ways to function, even if it's cursing at people. He still functions, sort of, you know. But you're right, Ralph cannot find a way, and Eva can't help him. She can't fix it for him, which is very poignant, I think.
And there's an extremely powerful scene where Eva eventually kills him in what she sees as a mercy killing.
Mm-hmm.
And the way that Morrison writes it makes it feel extremely maternal, as Ralph is feeling some type of fluid which he does not perceive as a threat, but I believe is gasoline.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And he does die. It is a murder, but again, Eva sees it as a mercy killing. And in explaining it later, she's like, that he couldn't climb back into my womb. There was nothing more I could do for him. And so this is why, she's basically putting him out of his misery.
Exactly. It's the saddest thing, and it's
Mhm.
horrific. And we should have said at the beginning that there are several moments in this book, several death things happen, bad things happen in this book. There are some horrific things in this book, but that it is horrific. And yet at the same time, like you said, she's doing this as a mother. She loves him, and this is her way of fixing it for him, and to take him out of the world that is causing him incredible pain and suffering. And it's very sad. It's very well written. I mean, again, Toni Morrison, goddess among prose writers, but it really, I had to put the book down at that point and just like get away from it for a while and just let that kind of permeate and process. And there are several. This is a book that's hard to put down, and yet sometimes you have to put it down and just process and then come back to it. At least that's my experience. So yeah, I'm glad we talked about that a little bit, because there's a little bit of an undercurrent of, with the two characters who come back from war with PTSD and such terrible trauma, those mental illnesses that are caused by incredible trauma like war. We don't see stories about that all the time. We don't get a chance to talk about those kinds of things. And this is a very kind of factually driven book. It's a novel, but so much of it is just inescapably human and true. And I think what Toni Morrison writes with Shadrach and Ralph and their experiences, after the war, just rings so true and so believable and sad and poignant and horrible, and it's just the gamut, right?
And
this extreme love that Eva has for him and what she does for him, again, the way that Toni Morrison develops these characters in this storyline and pulls you into it. I read that part of the book, and it's like, I too found I have no judgment against Eva.
Yeah.
I can't.
Oh, I
judge
did.
her,
Did you?
Oh yeah.
It's just like, oh my God, how else would I have done? Or I know I wouldn't have resorted to that, but how horrible for her to have dealt with this that way. But I don't know. I couldn't judge her. I could only, if I could have, I would have hugged her.
Well, I think
I'm really drawn into all the characters that way.
Sure, absolutely. Just lost my train of thought here.
Well, we were talking about judgment and
right. No,
your
it was
reaction
unrelated
to
to that.
Eva. Oh, okay.
It was unrelated to that.
Was it?
It has to do with the view of death.
Okay.
That Eva excuses herself because she sees this as a necessary death.
Mm-hmm.
She judges Sula for standing by while Hannah, Sula's mother, Eva's daughter, burns to death at a different point in the book.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting that, she judges Sula for this death of Chicken Little, and you're fascinated by it. Nell, you were fascinated by it. You were bad people for that. Sula, you were a bad person for standing by and being fascinated by your mother's death and doing nothing while she burned. But killing your son in this mercy killing, that was fine.
Yeah.
That was necessary.
Yeah.
Hannah
and Eva have a difficult relationship for sure. And I know it's chapter 1923 where Hannah dies from the fire, and that she accidentally she catches her dress on fire accidentally, and you're right. Eva watches this without helping.
No, Sula watches it. Eva tries to
Sula.
save her.
Oh, right. Sorry, so I
Mhm.
said the wrong name.
Mhm.
Sula watches it. Eva, doesn't she like jump out of a window to try to, and she injures herself, and for the rest of her life, she walks with a crutch or something. I can't remember, but the details. But I'm so bad with details. But I mean, imagine jumping out of a window to try to save your child. I mean, clearly, Eva loves both her children, even if with Hannah she had some strained relationship stuff and everything, but she has that fierce protective mother spirit, right? And I don't think she ever really forgives Sula for just standing there watching her mother burn to death, and this is her Eva is the grandmother of Sula, watching her grandchild. I mean, this is so fraught. This is so horrific. It's a mother watching her child burn while her granddaughter watches her mother burn under the watchful eye of the grand. I mean, it's so, you talk about circles. I mean, this is, mother, child, grandmother, child, mother. It's so complicated and it's so fraught and it's so horrific what happens. And, other people in the town, they just say, oh, well, Sula was just in shock. She didn't do anything because she was just in shock. And Eva doesn't buy that about Sula. Her own grandmother thinks that she was just interested
Mhm.
in
Mhm.
the process of a person burning to death. That it happened to be her mother was also interesting, I guess. I mean, Eva has judgment on Sula in that regard for sure. Yeah.
Mhm.
Next up, we continue our discussion of Sula by Toni Morrison.